I will turn it over to Dr. Battle.
Thank you, Ms. Player-Peters. I think you've covered what we needed to hit on for the opening. So I'll go ahead and invite up Chris Henson to lead us through both of those budgets that you just mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Battle. Good afternoon. Today we're going to look at two separate funds from the General Purpose Operating Fund. These are required to be kept separate in separate funds, and so we will look at these individually. The first one, as you can see on the screen, will be our Nutrition Services Fund. And before we start getting into the numbers, I did want to mention, obviously, how challenging of a year it has been for our Nutrition Services Department. Typically, the Nutrition Services Fund in a normal year is a self-supporting enterprise fund, which means that its expenditures are supported by the revenues that are generated through the fund, those revenues being mainly federal USDA reimbursements based upon meals served, as well as based upon paid meals for students that pay for meals, a la carte sales, etc. So in a typical year, the Nutrition Services Fund is a self-supporting enterprise fund. We all know last year in March, when we no longer had in-person school, there was serious concern regarding the Nutrition Services Fund as Dr. Battle made the decision that we were not going to furlough or lay off any of our nutrition services staff members, even though we didn't have the revenue coming in to that particular fund to be able to support the expenditures for that labor cost. If you remember, we were able to use approximately $9.9 million of our federal ESSER 1 funds to make it through the fiscal year 2019-20, so that we could close out the year with a positive balance in the Nutrition Services Fund. And so that, of course, is now history, but it also is playing itself again this year as well as potentially for next year. And so if I could just take a few minutes to ask a couple of the folks from the Nutrition Services Fund to come and just give you some examples of some of the creative ways that they have been feeding families and feeding our children and our students throughout last spring as well as this school year, in a very non-traditional environment where, as you know, typically students will come through a cafeteria line and purchase lunch and pay for it. And it's one of those things that participation level is always going to be much, much higher when you have in school or in-person learning. And so currently, our Executive Director of Nutrition Services, Spencer Taylor, is on military leave. And so Dr. Brene Cork has been filling in admirably as the interim executive director, and I'd like to invite her up, as well as Michael Robertson, who's over the finance part of the Nutrition Services Fund. And I've just asked Brene if she would just provide you with some examples where we can highlight and lift up the Nutrition Services team as they went, obviously, into a very unprecedented spring last year and an unprecedented school year this year. So, Brene?
Thank you, Mr. Henson, and thank you, Board, for hearing us today. Nutrition Services, our model, as you all know, with the traditional school, is students, as Mr. Henson said, come through the cafe, grab their meals, and have their seats. Of course, during this pandemic, we have not been able to do that, and actually our cafes are not even set up for the kind of model service that we've been doing. But we took the challenge on, and to make certain our students in our community were fed, we continued our service and changed our model. And so we had meals placed on buses so that students and families who did not have transportation, who could not make it to the school to actually pick up a meal, the school buses would take the meals out. They had what they call a meal route. And so we provided meals on buses. We provided meals where parents and families would just simply drive up. We would ask them how many students that they need meals for. We would hand the family those meals throughout the summer. To be totally honest, Nutrition Services has not stopped since the tornado of 2020. We were on the front lines, just as all of you all were with the school district, trying to make certain that the families of MNPS continue to receive the service that they need. We did receive a letter from one of our students, and I'd just like to read it to you today. It says, "Dear MNPS Food Delivery Site Employees Friends, my name is Sala Amos Gomez. I am a student at Glengarry Elementary School. I am writing to you today because you help us. Thank you for the hard work. You are so important to our community because you give us meals while we are out of school. Being positive during this time can look like hard, but it is easy. I spread positivity by spending time with my family. Your friend, Sala." So the students, what we do, the service that we're providing for the students, taking meals home, even providing meals on Fridays, so that for Saturday and Sunday, we are continue and dedicated to the meal service of the students of MNPS. And so on March the 7th is School Lunch Hero Day, and principals will be hearing more about it. If you notice my mask say, "I'm a lunch hero." We will be celebrating our school nutrition employees throughout the district, and so I just ask and encourage you to help us celebrate those folks because they're out on the front lines each and every day. Thank you so much.
Renee, what was that date again?
March 7th.
Is it March?
I'm sorry, May 7th. May 7th, 2021 is the School Lunch Hero Day.
Thank you. And I don't know if anyone has any questions for them. I just wanted to give them an opportunity because they have really done Herculean work over the last year plus. As I mentioned, last fiscal year, we were able to use some ESSER 1 funds, approximately $9.9 million, to help close the gap with that particular fund. This year, we are looking to use some ESSER 2 dollars to continue helping to close the gap because obviously we have not been in-person school this entire school year, and even as we are in-person now, we only have a portion of our total student population that's attending school in person. And so that particular fund does continue to need additional assistance so that they can end the year as they should with a positive balance. So let's just jump into the budget summary. Everyone should have a hard copy so that you can see it better than you can see it on that screen. This shows, as an overview, total revenue and expenditures for the fund. You can see at the top, the majority of the revenue for this particular fund comes from federal USDA meal reimbursements based upon student participation in the program. There's also, in this particular model here, we are showing no revenue from paid meals. The reason for that is because we are going to attempt, and when I say attempt, we feel confident that we can continue to allow all students to eat lunch at no cost. We were able to do that several years ago through the Federal Community Eligibility Program. It's based upon the poverty rate. Our poverty rate has been going down as measured by the federal government, and so several years ago we had to change the model where some schools continued to be able to feed all of their students lunch at no cost. Other schools, there was a process where families would have to qualify for free and reduced meals, and if not, then students would pay for those meals. We feel like we are going to be able to continue doing basically what we've done this year under the federal waivers that were provided based upon the pandemic, which allowed us to serve all students at no cost. And so we're planning to be able to continue doing that next year, again supplemented by ESSER funding. ESSER 3.0 funding is what we're planning at this point to hopefully, again, close that gap. But we feel like that we're going to be able to do this, and it's based upon the poverty count, if you can believe it or not, based on April 1st, which of course is Thursday. There will be some time lag before we get our official poverty numbers, our official poverty percentage, to see how that's going to impact the federal USDA meal reimbursements. But in this model here, we are showing no revenue for paid meals because we are going to offer meals at no cost to all students. You see the USDA Fresh Fruit and Vegetables Grant. There is after-school programs, a la carte sales, very small amount of state matching revenue, et cetera, et cetera. One other thing I did want to point out The positive thing that came out, one of the positive things that came out of last year's budget was the $15 per hour minimum wage. Well, that had a sizable, significant impact on a separate fund like this that does require its expenditures and revenues to match up to be self-supporting. And so we've got here an interfund transfer to be able to continue to offer that $15 per hour minimum wage. We're still looking at exactly what might be needed since we're still early in the process. But we're looking at approximately $41 million in revenue, total revenue for this program for next year. On the expense side, of course, the largest expense will be labor. You can see the labor is almost $26 million for salaries plus benefits. The next largest expenditure would be, of course, purchases of food. $14 million is the estimate here. You can see some of the other expenditures that are budgeted. We are showing expenditures to be a little over $47 million. This gap of approximately $6.5 million is what we're hoping to close with the ESSER 3 funding. Once that application is submitted and hopefully approved, then we can once again fill the gap that has been created by the pandemic and to be able to continue to offer no-cost meals to all of our students with those federal ESSER 3 dollars. I'm sure Dr. Randolph will be talking a little bit more about that later on this afternoon. And so this is the proposed budget for nutrition services. They have approximately 700 employees. Wanted to see if there are any questions at this point regarding this particular fund before we go to the Federal Programs and Grants Fund.
Can you define estimated commodities?
Yeah, I'm going to let either Brene or Michael. I have the same question almost every year because I apparently don't remember the answer. But commodities, I'll let Michael explain those.
Good afternoon, everyone. As part of the National School Lunch Program, we get food basically from the USDA. Most of it at no cost, but some of it does have a cost associated with it. For example, if you had just like ground beef, that's something that they give to us at no cost, but the donated value of it goes into the revenue line item of it. Then there's also what we have commodity processed goods. So example of that may be Tyson chicken tenders. So Tyson chicken tenders, the same ones you see at the store, modified to meet school nutrition standards. Normally when we buy it commercially in the food purchases, that may be $120 per case. By using commodity chicken to go into that product, it reduces and essentially gives us a discount, so we're buying it for maybe $90 a case. So that's where it comes in on the expense side.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments or, yes?
Yeah, I just had a comment. I appreciate the department. I was working with a program at Mount Calvary, and I had talked to Dr. Battle, and I think she talked to the department, and instead of them like using monies they didn't have, like they were able to take some of the food from Pearl Cone that was left over and donate it to the church. So I really appreciate you guys for doing that. It helped out tremendously.
Right. Wonderful. And I will say that as part of the cost reduction effort in the program, they did have a self-imposed hiring freeze as we were virtual, moving staff members from different locations to where they are needed because they were trying to minimize, again, the gap that was being created by the fact that the revenue was not meeting the costs or the expenses.
Belrod?
Thank you. So first, as always, thank you for the rundown of all this information, and thank you for coming and speaking to us and giving us that firsthand account of what that's like and what that apartment is like and speaking so well to it. I personally am really glad that we're providing these meals and plan to provide them again at no cost to our students next year. I want to make sure when we say meals that we understand it's still breakfast and lunch. It's not just one or the other.
Correct. Even when we became a non-CEP district, as you, I'm sure know, we continued to offer free breakfast to all students at every single school. And the proposal here would be to offer both breakfast and lunch at no cost to every single student, regardless of school.
Got it. And then I know we've talked about it before, but I have forgotten, and I apologize, about the after-school supper. Can you tell us about that program or where those schools are?
Let one of these two folks explain it.
Any school that's having an after-school programming, and if they are area eligible, meaning the economically disadvantaged students, we can offer supper at those schools. However, during this period of the pandemic, we have been sending supper home pretty much at all schools. Some principals, depending on the logistics, have told us which students need the meals and which students do not. So we've been providing supper and weekend meals to all families. And so we provide that. It's a separate program versus from our regular National Breakfast and School Lunch program.
Thank you.
I have a question. For the summer program that we plan to implement this summer, so would part of it come out of fiscal year 20 and half of it come in fiscal year 21, since I'm assuming it was spanned between 2 fiscal years? First, are we providing meals during that time? And if we are, would it span over 2 fiscal years because of the timing of it?
And that would actually be fiscal year 21 and 22, yeah.
Oh, yes,
Yeah, and do you, I'll see who wants to take it. We can take it during your presentation later, or do you want to go ahead and take it now?
I don't mind either one, if you want to wait later or now.
I think they said the short answer is yes, we'll be providing meals. Is there a specific question about the
I was
program
just
or
making
just
sure,
how it's?
like, how is the funding,
goes
are we
between
using
2
ESSER
fiscal
funds?
years.
So it won't matter what fiscal year it comes out of, like, because of the timing of it?
Correct, that's correct.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I'm also glad to hear about the paid program. I was going to ask about that. I know Chair Shepherd, that was one of her passion projects, that if there's any student lunch debt, that we raise the funds from the community. So I was saying, hopefully we won't have to come to that, given the funds that we will be able to access. But if we do, if you please let us know, I'm willing to carry on that legacy of hers to make sure that either now or in the future, if worst case scenario, we have that. But hopefully we will be able to use that with the federal funds to do that.
And as you mentioned, another very positive thing about the no-cost meals is that obviously there's no lunch charges for schools to have to deal with and parents, et cetera, et cetera. So it's got a number of benefits.
Oh, good. That's a good thing. Is there any other questions regarding? Oh, sure, Ms. Tyler.
So you said that they did a self-imposed hiring freeze for this year. Is that still in effect, or are they looking to hire back knowing that we're going to have a lot more students in school next year?
It was self-imposed hiring freeze for the end of last fiscal year, once in March and through the rest of the year, as well as for the first half of this fiscal year. I don't know if you have begun.
We're planning. We have been actually trying to be very efficient, and so we've been moving our employees around to the highest need schools, basically where they're serving lots of meals and have lots of students in-house. We've been moving employees there, so we have not hired anyone just yet. However, this summer we will gear back up to be prepared for the 21-22 school year.
Anyone else? All right, we'll move on to the federal grants.
Thank you very much. And I will kick us off and then turn it over to Dr. Randolph. You can see we're calling this strategic investments, obviously, federal programs and grants. Again, this is a separate fund from the general purpose operating fund, required to be a separate fund from our operating budget. And you can see on your hard copy, and we've got it on the screen, basically the summary of all of the different federal programs and grants. One reminder is that the federal fiscal year runs October 1st to September 30th. And so we don't always have a real good handle on what many of these federal grants might be yet here in March. And so using the best estimates that we can, realizing that this is all flow-through funding. And so as you all, I think, know by now, Tennessee is a reimbursement state, which means we must spend the money first, and then there's some period of time that goes by where we accumulate documentation and then request reimbursement from the Tennessee Department of Education. And that would be the case, for all of these grants. And so again, the fiscal year, federal fiscal year running October 1 to September 30th obviously doesn't align real well with our fiscal year, July 1 to June 30th. But these are our best estimates. Here you have listed all of the different federal programs and grants. The column on the left that says FY21, 2020-21 approved, this is what the school board approved for this year, last year, during the budget process. Of course, we were just finding out about ESSER 1 at that particular time, so we went ahead and plugged in the full amount of $26 million, even though we all know that some of that went to charter schools, some of it went to non-public schools, and we have spent some of it, but not the full amount this fiscal year. The rest of it, you can see it adds up to almost $121 million for this year. What we try to do is estimate how much do we think we're going to actually spend in the next fiscal year. Regardless of how large the grant is, if it's a multi-year grant, what you're budgeting for a fiscal year is how much you think you're going to spend in that fiscal year. And so since it is flow-through funding, spend it first, then get the reimbursement from TDOE, revenues and expenditures at some point ultimately will match each other. And so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Randolph and see what you might like to add to this, and then of course see what questions that the board may have.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chris. I don't have a whole lot to add to that, but I'm happy to answer questions, any that you might have.
I have a question. It's more of a clarifying question for anyone who's watching this meeting for fun. So when we look at our projected amount of federal grant funds, this is not just a pot of money that we can spend on just anything, correct? This is very specific funding. When we seek the reimbursements, we have to be able to show that we spent it on exactly, just throwing out an example. I mean, one of them is very specifically, Title I, improving the academic achievement of the disadvantaged, or to get even more specific, Tennessee Safe Schools. I would imagine that has some really specific guidelines. So I just thought maybe you could elaborate on that just a bit.
Absolutely. You've done a great job of describing it, actually. What I would maybe add to that is for every grant you see listed here, we have to, whether it's competitive or non-competitive, we have to submit a budget of how we are proposing to spend that money within the allowable uses of those funds, to your point, which is dictated by the terms of that grant and that money. And then when we submit for reimbursement, it must match that budget, right? We must say, we spent, remember our budget, remember? We spent this, and here's the documentation to show what we spent it for. It matches the budget. We're asking for reimbursement in that amount.
Thank you. That was a great explanation.
Mr. Little?
Yeah, and it's just a question of observation. I see one of the programs with Growth STEM is ending in 2021. Do we have an opportunity to continue a program like that focuses on STEM, or will we just focus on other programs outside of STEM?
That's a great question. So we certainly have more happening in STEM that's represented by that grant. But a grant like that is exciting to me as somebody who thinks about strategic investments, because it really allows us to put some laser focus, do some really intensive work around something that we can then learn from and scale across the district. So we've been meeting with that team to find out how we can be supportive and continue that work.
Rod?
Okay, so for the ESSER 1 funds, there was a mention that some of it has not been spent. Can you define what that means for anybody on the view, that's watching this, I guess, as Emily put it?
Yeah, so back to Ms. Masters' question, which is a good one. When we put in our application, non-competitive, but we said, look, here's the uses for ESSER 1, here's what we propose to spend it on, such as the $9.9 million that Mr. Henson mentioned around nutrition services. So what we do then is we had a spending plan for that money. Now I'll remind everyone that ESSER 1, and I put this at the bottom because it gets confusing. So it's down here at the bottom. ESSER 1 allowability goes from March 2020 through June 23, right? So some of the expenses that we have in there, we have proposed and haven't actually incurred yet. Many of them we have, and to be frank, the way I think about this one is we have spent that money. We are waiting for reimbursement on what we've currently submitted, and then we'll immediately submit for reimbursement again. We don't have a lot of outstanding, but it will hit us in FY22. But it's all encumbered or in the process of being encumbered. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
It does.
Ms. Tyler?
Can you explain a little bit what school improvement, school competitive means?
Right, so there are competitive and non-competitive grants listed on here. This one is a competitive grant around school improvement. I have my little cheat sheet here, if you'll give me 1 second. That one is a multi-year grant that we were awarded. And let's see, we're in year 3 of that grant. And actually, we just have carryover there for the most part. And it was around 6 specific schools that applied for that grant that receive it. But it's pass-through money through us. So we help both manage and make sure it's aligned to the budget to our previous conversation, then pull it down.
So is that like physical improvements or?
It's in the priority schools, and so they submitted, I'm sure it was around academics and instruction.
Yeah.
Else have any questions or comments?
This looks like a lot to manage, hence why we're all taking some time to read all of it. So I appreciate it. I think, I'll speak for myself. I think, looking through it, I'd have to go through and see what each grant meant if that is something that was concerning to me. But overall, I think the overall concerns that we've had through ESSER, through constituents has been, are we going to spend all of it? Do we have it all earmarked or accounted for? When can we turn all that in? And I think your answer was great for me of being able to explain that in essence those funds are earmarked and we may not have spent them yet, but that we have the plans to spend them through the year of 2023 with that date down here. So I appreciate that being here so we have that specific June date for all ESSER 1, 2, and 3 funds. So that's my only comment, I guess.
If I can echo to that, your point, Ms. Elrod, you'll also notice with ESSER 3 that that has, the grant term ends in 24. And so when we're thinking about things like our nutrition services program to provide no-cost lunches, based upon our spending plan, you have an example, potential example here, where if you want to do that over multiple years, that money would not be drawn down until that fiscal year. And so it is likely because of the timeline of the grant that you'll always have funds that are waiting to be expended year over year, given your strategy that you're.
So it's safe to assume or to say that we are not basically spending all of our money at once. We're really just using it almost like a reserve fund, for lack of a better phrase, that we are thoughtful and thinking about not just this fiscal year, fiscal year 22. I keep getting my years mixed up. Pandemic brain. That we're using them for fiscal year 22, 23, and then with fiscal year 24, that we're going to pace it out, that we're not going to spend it basically all at once, as in terms of immediate expenditure, but we do have plans of making sure what that looks like over the next couple of fiscal years. Is that safe to say?
There will be some scenarios that fit exactly what you just described.
Okay, because I think that's I think there's an assumption among the public that it's kind of we've like won the lottery, and so we just have this cash of pool sitting, waiting to go, and that we can just go ahead and just have this immediate cash infusion into the schools, not understanding that we, have to apply, like we have to come to a plan, have to come to a budget, submit it to the state, get approval from the state, and then we go from there. So I think an immediate thing is that we just have carte blanche of what we can do and how we can do it. So I know that's some of the discussions I'm having, that saying that it's just not like, we won Powerball and, we're having a field day with it. That was this very specific things. I wish we could do that, because I think there's so much we could do. And immediate thing, and also I think the public also needs to be mindful of being, and Dr. Battle has said it many times, of leveraging the funds, that we don't have financial cliffs, that we don't set up an expectation of, we're doing a cash infusion, and then at the end of the day, we're either hiring employees on a temporary contract, and that has ramifications of employees not providing benefits, or you pay into a system that an employee can never recoup from because it'll never be vested, but also realizing that we don't want to set up a support system and then have to withdraw that support system, and then if there's some level of success, then we have to figure out, going either to the mayor or the council, asking to recoup those funds, and that would be a large amount to assume all at once, basically almost like a balloon payment. And so understanding to the public that these funds, we have to be very judicious and very careful on how we use it when we do it, but it's not the jackpot that we would love to have in our wildest dreams. So I just want to clarify that for the public, so they understand that. Is there anything else? Oh, sure, Ms. Tyler.
One more question. Down here, you have the principal pipeline with money approved for this school year, but it's not included in next school year. Is it like a finite program that ends and that's it? Is it to develop leadership skills? Is it to?
Yeah, the state didn't continue that particular grant program, so it ended. Right, and it actually, the reason it's listed under FY21 is it actually ended at the end of the last year. We had time to, it's actually been gone for a little bit now.
Okay. I don't think I see any further discussion or questions. So next, as the board members take time, review it. I know there's a lot of information that we're digesting. I'll let Mr. Henson close out with any comments or any other materials he wants to present.
And we can come back to these, obviously. We wanted to get these in front of the board before you vote on a budget proposal on April 13th, because these two funds will be included with whatever you vote to approve on the general purpose operating fund. So we wanted to go ahead and get these in front of you. And again, they can be discussed further. There may be a need for some amendments based upon additional information that may come out. And if so, obviously, we'll be sharing that with you. But since we've had, as was indicated, a number of fairly large grants that have been coming through the federal legislation, basically through the TDOE to us, wanted to make sure to try to get these out to you early. Obviously, the ones that would be the newest would be the ones where there wasn't any funding in the current fiscal year approved, because they are new. And so you can see those three there that are large numbers. And again, this is the amount that we are planning, estimating that we will spend in fiscal year 21-22, with the total amount and the grant term ending dates at the bottom.
Well, thank you, Mr. Henson, and thank you to Ms. Brene and Michael for presenting. We appreciate your work and your effort. I know putting all this together and sometimes not offering with full information. Thank you for putting all this together and doing what you do. We will continue to have these discussions. Let me know if you need any more time or questions, and we will get those answers to you. Put my calendar out. And we will have another budget meeting on the 6th. So April 6th will be the next budget meeting, and then that'll be our second to last one. And then we will have the other one on the 13th, and then we will vote on the final budgets. There's multiple budgets we have to vote on, this nutritional federal grants and the operating budget. So that will be our calendar for the rest of the term, and then we'll submit it to the mayor's office and go from there. So thank you, everyone. I appreciate everyone attending, and we are adjourned.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information about this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.